Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I cannot say that I'd like to start on time, but since we have a critical mass and we have the members of the panel, I'd like to start. Wish you all Happy New Year, past, but also Happy New Year's Eve, according to the Julian calendar used in most of the Christian Orthodox world. New Year's coming up. So peace, happiness, and very best to us, our families, and our countries. It's nice to have NGIC back in Geneva. It's very rewarding when you see, when you're present at the creation, and then you see that creation putting down roots and obtaining foliage. So this is the third now meeting at UNOG, and this platform is well on its way to becoming a January tradition in Geneva, which President Vicky Freiberger yesterday called the citadel of multilateralism. I like that very much, except this time the citadel is missing a little bit of electricity, a little bit of finances, etc. Our two-day meeting is an important contribution to the run-up to the Summit of the Future to be held in New York in September 2024. And within this larger effort, we're called upon in this panel to define and discuss the key issue of global governance reform. Now, governance is a concept intrinsic to the development of humankind from the dawn of time. At the turn of the 20th century, however, the need for a new form of governance emerged, that of governance outside and among nation states. And here is where the international community has been struggling for over a century to come up with the right formula. To be sure, the world needs better ways to manage its many growing problems, many of which were described here. In attempting to grapple with these Herculean tasks, however, the default intellectual approach of the international community is to look at global institutions, the United Nations and the Bretton Woods system, and propose significant reforms with the stated objective of adapting them to today's world and future challenges. Fair enough. Yet we do not have the luxury of viewing the global institutions just as entities unto themselves, whose reform alone will fix the problem. In reality, they are all run, financed, well, except for the UN Secretariat, and are serving the member states that have created them. So when the international community takes on the task of reforming governance, it should do so in a holistic manner. If, as the saying goes, charity begins at home, well, so do reforms. It is around these very complex fundamental issues of the interplay of the Westphalian nation-state mindsets and actions of the role and actions and the roles they ascribe to their own creations, the global institutions, and the governance of the international community, that we hope to have a discussion in this panel today, and in general in this conference. If not this heavyweight group, then who? And if not now, then when? In this context, I'd like to also refer to all the incredibly important things that have been said since the opening, and actually even since the last night, and to keep this in our minds. We have an extremely impressive lineup of speakers who are called upon to do this, and it promises to be a stimulating discussion. Now, my task to moderate this segment is a great privilege. It also all the more daunting since initially this panel had 1 hour, 15 minutes, not 30, and now we started late. So I think I will do my best to stick to 1 hour, 15 minutes. For this, I will need to ask everybody to be very disciplined, and I will have to be ruthlessly accurate to keep to the time limits. And the time limits, I think, best set would be 5 minutes for opening statements, 2 minutes for replies to questions, comments, and 3 minutes for closing statements. That would give 10 minutes to each speaker in general. And I hope that if we manage to stick to this, we may have about 10, 15 minutes for discussion, which I'll do my best to intersperse with the statements. With this, let me introduce our speakers in the order that they are presented in the program. And we start with Prime Minister Kjell Magne Bondevik of Norway. One of the good things about our meetings is that we all know each other, you all know each other, so you don't need long introductions, because if we did do introductions, an hour, 15 or 30 minutes would not be enough. So with that, please.
Is it on now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator. I've tried to keep within the limit of 5 minutes and be disciplined. We are talking very much about multilateralism, both on this conference today, but also in other international conferences for the time being. But I really very often ask myself, is there a willingness among the main powers in the world of today to strengthen the multilateral organizations? I must honestly say I'm in doubt. If you look upon some of the main actors in the world of today, Russia, with the president, doesn't care about international appeals to stop the war in Ukraine. Our co-chair, Vaida Freiberga, referred to meetings with him. I also is a former politician who met President Putin several times. His very beginning as prime minister. And I'm so surprised how he has changed. Maybe we misunderstood him in the beginning, because then he was talking about democracy and multilateralism and so on. So if we go across the Atlantic to the US, we will have a possible new president there in a year's time, whom we know will reduce the US engagement in multilateral organizations, even threatening to withdraw US from NATO. What world are we approaching? It's not dominated by multilateralism, but more and more unilateralism. That is the fact. I would like leaders like the most impressive person I ever met, namely former president, late President Nelson Mandela. I will never forget, I received him as a very young foreign minister of Norway back in 1990. He was released after 27 years in prison, as we remember. This was before he became president. He came to a conference in Oslo. I should go with him in a car to the conference hotel, 15, 20 minutes. And what I expected was a man full of bitterness and a wish of revenge, because the white minority had punished him for 27 years because he was fighting for equal rights. What did I meet? I met the person sitting beside me in the car, only talking about reconciliation, and that he wanted to build up again South Africa together with the white minority. I was really surprised. And he did what he said. Years after, when he became president, as we remember, he appointed the last apartheid white president, Frederick de Klerk, as his vice president. This is inclusive democracy, not a formal democracy that the winners take it all and the majority is ruling. Inclusive minority. He included the white minority and gave them equal rights. In this framework, I will also say that we need a stronger UN, our only real global organization. But UN was organized in the shadows of the Second World War, especially the UN Security Council, and I will focus on that, is composed on this background and completely outdated, as also Freiberga touched upon. And this is weakening the authority of the Security Council, no doubt, based on the realities of the world of today, it is meaningless to have a Security Council without a permanent member from the whole continent of Africa, without a permanent member from Latin America, and without a permanent member from the Arab world. Amr. It is completely outdated. While we are having 2 permanent seats from the Western Europe, it's meaningless. And they are blocking for obvious reasons for change and reforms. So I say sometimes, when do we get an uprising in the UN demanding a change and reform? We know that it is very difficult. Some say impossible, but I want to point to it. I would like to see an uprising. As Mr. Korosi informed me today, it is a formal possibility, namely to call for a UN General Conference, General Assembly, but General Conference by all members of the UN. And they have the mandate to change or make a new charter, but so it has to be ratified by all the members afterwards. And then we know what probably will happen. If this way is not possible, is it possible to think about a new UN body? Like a board of directors for the UN above all other bodies that is more fair and just comprised. We know that the main actors in the future now will be the US, China, Russia, European Union, the African Union, Latin America, and for instance, the Arab League. A fair composition of the Security Council or another new board above them could be of these main actors. That will be more updated than the outdated Security Council is today. So let me end up here to keep my promise within 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you. If we had journalists here, I think in 5 minutes we would see a headline all over the world media that former Prime Minister of Norway confirms Trump will be president of the United States.
No, not confirmed, but I'm afraid of.
Yeah, so I think many people are. But thank you very much for your presentation and for throwing out these ideas, because there needs to be as much out there as possible so that perhaps once member states get around to discussing it, that they will have something to sift through. Thank you. I'd like to move to my compatriot, Eka Khashilashvili, for her presentation. Thank you, Eka.
This is working, right? And is it? Yeah. And David, if I'm overstepping my time limit, please do remind me, because I can usually get carried away with talking. So
unfortunately,
yeah,
I'm not sitting next to you, so I can't kick
somehow
you under the table.
Not the table, no, but do, yeah.
do
But remind me if you want to, yeah, orally as well. Well, I'll try to be brief and concise, having the time limitations as we have it. And if we start to talk about the global governance reform, I think we need to be honest in digging deeper into what are the root causes, right, of the problems that we face. And it's not just the time expiration of the governance framework as we have it, which is very old by now, right? And then created in a different historical context, which at that time looked quite fair and effective and worked for quite some time. And we have to acknowledge that as well. So it's not that the system failed. For quite some time, system worked, and then it delivered stability and economic development and growth for some time. But then we now face a profound cyclical change, perhaps, when it's not the economics which drive the policies, but policies started to drive economics back. So it's not the mindset in which interdependence, trade, economic growth, higher figures in terms of distribution of the wealth, or if not even a distribution of the wealth, but wealth as an accumulation of wealth that could be the driver of that stability. We see that it's not working anymore for reasons that could take too much time for us to look into, but primarily for the policy-related issues and actors that are so deeply entrenched in the policy-related visions that they have, and readiness and commitment and ability to pull through, to act on that, like Russia's Putin is, for example, by destabilizing so much international governance framework, that we see that the system is cracking. So the system is objectively cracking for the reasons of the lack of inclusivity as well, and then the time expiration. But we see that there is a pattern as well that is changing in the way that what is aspiring and then pulling factor politically as well for countries that are powerful enough and dedicated enough to act on it, that we don't see that anytime soon they will change their trajectory of thinking and acting. And with that, we don't see that something will miraculously change and then the change will be delivered per se. And if I'm skeptical about it, I guess I'm just looking into it from this perspective, that if there's any conference or any gathering, anything that is proposed as a reform, and there has been many ideas for now as well that have been proposed, it's not working because we don't have a commonality of the strategic goal that is broad enough for that change to happen. So alternative, what could be seen that one can pursue in the meantime is to see how the gap can be filled in the meantime while work needs to continue on the change of the global framework per se. And by that, what we see right now in Europe at least is an attempt of revisioning how European Union, and then when it comes to the military alliance like NATO, regional discourses could be strengthened in the way that in the democracies as European countries are, electorate is becoming more aware how the commonality of the strategic goals and dedication to pursue those will matter for their own stability in the future. So in that regard, I see that the world will remain to be fragmented for quite some time, and we cannot be inspired by not illusions, I wouldn't say that, but wishful to a certain degree thinking that we can come close to the global commonality of views and readiness to act on it, and especially bankrolling that anytime soon in this regard. So if we look into that from this perspective, I guess part of the lessons learned from Bretton Woods process or conference needs to be looked at more deeply, why it became success at the time for the time being when it was a success. And comprehensiveness, to my mind, was one of that. So it was not only the institutional development that we've seen that happened of different institutions at the time, but normative basis was substantially changed at the time. And to a degree, it provided more inclusivity rather than winners, so to say, fully deciding what the framework should have looked like. And what I see that we are lagging behind right now is a sufficient effort that is put for normative development as well when it comes to the issues that are particularly challenging. So we talk a lot about technological advancements these days. And there is work that is ongoing on e-commerce related front, and then your free flow of data, ethical norms of biotech. But if you look at it from the global perspective, asymmetry is still very large in terms of potential global agreement between different parts of the world. And until that part is being maintained, it's very hard to imagine that there will be sufficient trust in global mechanisms where inclusivity of economic development in that regard and global governance and oversight could be actually accomplished. And in that regard, we see that Europe is far ahead in terms of the data protection front, but then we don't see that the similar developments are happening in different parts of the world, which gives them competitive advantage to some degree on the technological developments, including in biotech. And if that maintains, it's very hard to see that even in that sector and in that front that is very critical for accomplishment of SDG goals as well, that there will be anything that will be called global per se and sustainable even more so. We're already close to 5 minutes. Yeah, it's hard a timeline. And finally, perhaps since my time is expiring, I would conclude that while thinking about the new norms, we cannot and shall not forget about the norms that maintain the global stability up until now, as it was at least imperfect, but there was. And in that regard, fundamental principles of international law when it comes to the sovereignty of countries, territorial integrity of countries, equality of states, big or small, and then human rights in terms of the fundamental rights. If we don't reinvigorate trust in that, global system will never reemerge and will never be revitalized, because those who have suffered will continue to distrust anything that will be global enough, and those who have abused those rules will continue to abuse and continue to do so. So no reform will generate enough trust and political momentum for that to materialize, especially in the UN reform. So, thank you.
Eka, brilliant. Thank you. You did it. Thank you for raising these issues. Some of them I'd like to circle back to in the discussion. We now have Mr. Amr Moussa, Secretary General of the Arab League and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt in the past, but always, always a wise person. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, it is very important to meet at the beginning of this year, which would witness a lot of major changes around the world and concerning the big powers, and also the summit on the future. I find an important link between the title of this morning's inaugural meeting, which spoke about the need for a new global pact for international cooperation or international relations, and the title of this session, which is Global Governance Reform. Indeed, we need this global governance reform. But the question is not the reform itself, like the content of the reform. It is not an address, it's not a title, but the content. Because of what happened that has shaken the system and, in fact, uncovered its weaknesses and dangers inherent in the violation of that system. I am one of those who believe that this UN system, the multilateral system that has been launched back in 1945, is a success story, it's not a failure. The failure came with the Security Council and as a result of the veto power and the playing politics and double standards that has hindered the work of the Security Council. So the failure is in the international security system, but not in the whole multilateral system. That is why it is important, indeed, to have a new conference. The idea of a UN global conference is a very solid idea. And I believe if we, as a result of this meeting, the January meeting, we would formulate some recommendations to be put before the Secretary General and the conference, the suggested conference. We must insist that the summit of the future should decide to call for a UN General Conference to consider the future of the system. Yes, indeed, there are 4 or 5 new points that have to be added that have not been tackled by the Charter. The issue of climate change or pandemics, which the Secretary General himself considered them as a new definition, as part of the new definition of threats to international peace and security in a speech he made back in 2019. Not only those 2 items, but also the role of the international civil society, which has not been mentioned anywhere. Now is the time to introduce the role of this system, the international civil society system, as an addition, a good addition to the work of the UN, not only states, but states and organizations involved in the work, in the mobilization of the international public opinion and in defending so many issues. Also, the poverty. And poverty is the real enemy of the global South, minus China, as has been said this morning. poverty. All those issues must be mentioned, must be stressed in any new declaration or in any new pact, to be annexed to the charter, not to amend the charter, but to have it as an appendix or a
yellow light is
blinking. I don't see any yellow light.
Anyway. Virtual.
Okay. Anyway, the point is that there are also other issues that will have to be tackled, like the destructive policies that have rendered the Security Council useless. Of late, we have witnessed something that has never happened before, that the Security Council was unable to adopt a resolution on a ceasefire, while in the next room, CNN was broadcasting a major destruction of civil life in Gaza. It is impossible to have the Security Council paralyzed to that extent that it cannot issue a resolution on ceasefire while the war is going on, destruction is there, and many casualties, including babies and children. This is something that is unheard of. It has destroyed the credibility of the system. It's not a question of paralysis, it is total destruction of the security system. Things of that kind will have also to be reflected in whatever report we would agree on to be sent to the Secretary General as a contribution in the preparation for the summit, summit of the future. How many minutes do I have?
No, we're not talking minutes, we're talking seconds.
Okay, so let us be honest. Things cannot continue that way. It has been stressed this morning by several contributors to the two panels. That situation is very dangerous and that the credibility of the system has received a direct hit. Our job is to save the situation and to speak with honesty and clarity. Things cannot go that way. Security Council cannot be just deleted, stopped from performing, and that we have to contribute to the reformulation of the international security system. Is not a question of numbers of members of the Security Council or the issue of the lack of the permanent rules of procedure. All that is relevant. But the question is the authority of the Security Council that has been destroyed. The credibility of the international security system that has been destroyed. And this is the issue that we should discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Musa. Thank you also for pointing out these practical outcomes that we could present as takeaways from our meeting for further discussion in the larger context. I'm now pleased to invite Mr. Vuk Jeremic, the President of the 67th General Assembly and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Serbia.
Thank you very much, David. It's a great pleasure to be back with everybody here at the Nizami Ganjawi Center. Timely discussion. It's a very momentous year, 2024, with the Summit for the Future, with a number of really consequential elections taking place around the democratic world. I'd like to try and be a little bit of an enfant terrible here in comparison to most of the other interventions, and I'm going to try and call spade a spade and to explain why I'm not exactly terribly optimistic about Secretary General's valiant attempt to call for the meeting that is going to reset the rules or be the inception of the resetting of the rules. And I believe the reason is very simple, because we are actually, as humanity and as a generation, now being profoundly shaken by some very significant wars. I mean, these wars are happening, and these wars are not about to end, and these wars are without guardrails, I think. 2024 is going to be the year of exacerbation of those wars, and there's going to be another war added to it, which is not a hot war in the way that the hot war in Ukraine is and the hot war in the Middle East is, but there's going to be a very significant and profound political war that is going to rage in the United States of America. I mean, it has already started, but it's going to get worse as we move from a month to a month. It's going to have profound influence on the wars that I mentioned, the hot wars that I mentioned, and in the discussions in the future of global governance, and the discussions of the global economy, and all that. President Tadic mentioned this morning these wars, and I believe that one should really try and go one step further, trying to set the right framework for the narrative of those who would like to see global governance changed for the better, or saved, as a matter of fact, from extinction. The war in Ukraine is going to continue, and I'm not sure that the outlook's too bright for those who are sympathetic with the cause of Ukraine's defending its territorial integrity and sovereignty. And the war in the Middle East is, I believe, even worse when it comes to the prospects of coming to a more than a temporary ceasefire now and then. I think it's out of control. I think the political motive of some of the key players, including the government of Mr. Netanyahu, is simply not such that they would like to see this come to an end. This would be the end of, or like the very likely end of, this cabinet of Israel if the war comes to an end, even if it comes to a more positive than negative in end. And that, of course, plays into the American political equation. And the third thing, the political war that I referred to, I'm going to go one step beyond Prime Minister Bondevik to say that actually it is very likely that there's going to be a change in Washington. And I think we need to take it into our calculations. If there's, let's say that it's a 50% chance. I personally believe it's above 50%. But hey, it's a very significant chance, very significant probability there's going to be a profound change of government or the outlook of global governance in Washington. I think we need to put it into our calculations. And if there is this change of government in Washington, I'm not sure if they're going to be terribly impressed, the new government of the United States, with the outcome of the summit for the future, regardless of that outcome may be. So what to do under such circumstances? The short and honest answer is I don't know, but trying to go one step beyond this is to say, why don't we concentrate on first things first, and as international community, kind of elders of the international community, appeal on what is, in my opinion, the mother of all priorities. And this is to sue for peace. To sue for peace in Ukraine, to sue for peace in the Middle East, and to try and work with both sides of the political aisle in the United States, not just the one that we like more or find more close with, given our multilateral instincts and histories, but to try and reach out and bring into our conversations those who are not necessarily people that you would vote with both hands for in the American elections if you had a right to vote in the American elections. I think it would be perilous and dangerous to ignore this strong possibility. And I'm going to stop here. I'm going to stop here because I don't purport to have answers to the questions that I
We
want.
have 2 more minutes.
Yeah, later on.
Thank you very much. You certainly delivered on your promise to be enfant terrible, or how did you? But hopefully we'll get back to some of the points that you raised. Let me now turn to the former Chancellor of Austria, Mr. Werner Faymann, for his statement. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much that I have again the chance to discuss with you. When I heard all the catastrophes you mentioned, and I fully agree with all of them, I remember that my grandma experienced 2 world wars. And this is not 500 years ago, because my grandma's not possible, that's 500 years ago. So our goal must be to avoid a new world war and to find multilateral, international solidarity approaches to avoid a world war and to support all people who have the desire for a peaceful world and for without poverty and with a minimum of living standards and with chances and challenges against the climate change. So I think this desire of the people, especially in democracies, is a strong power to change institutions or the approach of changing institutions. If you go to European countries, and I'm sorry that I like to discuss about European countries because many of you are from other countries in other parts of the world, experts, and so I want this experience in this conference mention. If you discuss with people in Europe, they are disappointed about governments. Many of them are disappointed about European bureaucracy. Some of them are disappointed about European Union as a whole, as a total program. So this means that if people are disappointed about something, they create answers which are narrow-minded, which are not international-minded, which don't have a multilateral approach. It is more nationalistic, and it's the chance for populistic parties to address these fears or to address this disappointment of people. And therefore, we have to support the other side. No one has a recipe where you can say, if you do this and that, then everything will change to the better tomorrow morning. So if someone says he has this recipe, don't believe him. There are no magicians. But what we can do as people who are supporting a peaceful world and an international approach is to support all the people who are on our side. And if someone says America first, and he means America should be the first for solidarity to solve on an international level all these problems and challenges, I think we should support it. If someone is in a European country who is in favor of strengthening the European Union and the European Union to support the UN and international level, we should support it. I think this is the goal we can do, and we should do it. And therefore, I'm glad to be here and know so many people in this room who also have this philosophy, idea of a better world, knowing that it is not an easy goal. And we are, last year, we had a lot of very negative experience. But to being strong, to say multilateralism and international politics and approaches and solutions is the right way. Also, for me, I don't know if everybody agrees there, it is necessary to be aware that you need compromises. And this is, I think, a little bit controversial also in our group. because compromise sometimes sounds as a bad compromise. It's you are not strong enough to fight the values against the other. You are not ready to give everything against the other. But I think you cannot really manage these conflicts without being ready, also finding compromises. And I think this is an approach we also should take in mind. If it's a financial change in an institution, we have to find compromises where somebody is a winner and somebody doesn't win at this time, but perhaps next time. If we try to get it to stop a war, I think you also have to negotiate. And negotiate is for some people a form of weakness, but it's not a weakness, because we cannot be able to find solutions without having this compromise. And it was Helmut Schmidt who said it's one of the most important inventions of our time and of democracy to be ready for compromises. So I wanted to focus it because there is one point. What are the potential obstacles and resistance to reforming institutions? The obstacles is that the public opinion is not on our side, or some egoism or some nationalisms are against us. And the other side is the side of optimism, and it's the side of thinking with also about the alternatives and being open-minded. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Feynman. You raise excellent points about compromise, negotiation, and that is what should be happening inside the Security Council. And it is not happening because there's 5 members who go to a knife fight with a gun in their pockets. And if it wasn't for the veto power, you'd see a totally different pattern of diplomacy in that chamber. And perhaps we wouldn't be in the place we are today, and we would not need to compromise the victim with the aggressor in order to reach negotiations. I think that's where it should be starting. Thank you so much. Our last but no means least speaker is the former president of Slovenia, Mr. Borut Pahor. You have the floor, sir.
Colleagues and friends, Mr. Chairman, Mr. David, let me start by supporting your idea to publicly, say that our group, our international center, is supportive to this idea of international conference on the future of United Nations. I think the time has come for a broad dialogue on this issue, and everyone should be there in the room, trying to make, as Werner has said it, by consensus or by huge majority, some sort of a new global order with effective institutions. So I think also colleague Musa proposed to say publicly with some sort of recommendation or in a way to inspire those in international community that are of the same opinion of we are. Number one, I'm wondering if there is a condition to modernize UN institutions like Security Council to get to a new level of global order. If there is a condition, a war, global conflict, or it is possible to get there without a global conflict, without a war. Let us, for example, look to the 20th century. After the First World War, we've got first United Nations, League of Nations. Then that didn't work. in the middle, in mid-century, there has been a war, Second World War, and after that, United Nations. Now, the legitimate question is, do we need a global conflict to, come to a next level of international collaboration? Now, if we would be of the opinion that it is a historical fact that without a war or a global conflict, there is no chance to get there, then basically there is no room for us. There is no need for us to come together and try to, do our best to get there without a global conflict or war. So I think there is no historical, proof that there is impossible to modernize the global political community without a war. But I think there is a possibility to get there, and I think we should do whatever it takes with others who are of the same opinion as we are to avoid hot wars and with dialogue and compromises, try to reach a new level of UN or international institutions. Slovenia has been now twice a non-permanent member of the Security Council of United Nations. First in 1997, and we've just started the second term in office, let's say so. What a difference between those two terms in 20 years. In 1997, the country, the people, have been so proud of the fact that we are we are part of global community, that we are deciding about global issues. Now there is a concern in my country, looking to the war in Ukraine, looking to the this awful conflict in Gaza. There is a general concern among our people. Will we be able to reach the expectation of our own people and the peaceful majority of the people in the international community? And we are not sure that we will deliver. This is the fact. So I think to finish with, I think this idea of a global international conference on the future of United Nations is a very noble one. I think our international center should support it publicly with a consensus of us, naturally. I think there are possibilities to go through this difficult period of time without a hot wars. I think there are 55 now in the world, so more than enough. So I think we should make clear that we believe, at least, we don't know, but we believe. We don't know, but we believe that there is a chance for the world to escape hot war and to get to the new level of confidence among parties in the world to tackle all the problems of international community together and get the effective solutions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. It's really refreshing to hear you pose that question, because it's something that I wrote in a piece back in 2020 on the history and future of multilateralism, making that precise point that throughout history, humankind has come back to multilateralism, to the mindset, only after some cataclysm, whether it was the 100-Year War, whether it was the Napoleonic Wars, et cetera, et cetera. And the whole point is that we have no luxury left of waiting for a cataclysm to happen, because it's going to be our last cataclysm. And we have to do this without a major bouleversement, as they say in French. And this also plays, jives very well with the question at the outset of Mr. Bondevik's statement: is there a will? And this is perhaps an issue that one of the issues. It's been an incredibly rich discussion, and I would like to open the floor if there are questions, comments. Please, we have actually about 15, 20 minutes, if we count that it should be 1 hour 15. So there's some of the points that I really picked up on was the issue of avoiding World War III or World War. Well, some have argued that a world war is in a low level intensity going on now in different parts of the world. And the further we go, the more it seems to be the case. The other issue that I thought was incredibly important was sue for peace. And I'm not sure that I would agree with the enfant terrible on this. There are many issues here, so please, are there any questions? If you need more time, let me try to address this question. Let's start with the suing for peace. Would somebody like to pick up? Eka maybe, or
why would you not agree? I mean,
why would I not agree? Because it puts the victim and the aggressor on the same. And if you sue for peace, for example, in Ukraine, you wind up doing Mr. Putin a huge favor. And if you sue for peace in Gaza, in my mind, you can hit me if you want, but you will have done what those who were behind the Gaza atrocity on the 7th of October, who thought this through, how this would play out, because there was a predictable reaction from Israel. And it was all built in, it seems. And we need to look behind the curtain. Who is there? And the best litmus test, the shibboleth, is who stands to gain. So, in the UN, we don't name countries, we name problems. So I will abstain from naming countries, but I think it's all obvious what we're talking about here. So would you like to pick up on that?
Very, very briefly to add to that, because you've already commented with your arguments as well, David, why you disagreed with the concept. We tend to forget sort of an evolutionary pathway, right? How some of the conflicts that we face now have evolved over the time. And the pattern is this: it starts with low intensity problem, which is left without any consequence, exactly and driven by the noble goal of achieving at least a partial ceasefire or a peace at the time, patching the wound, so to say, and then it comes back with a higher intensity problem. And that has been at least a pattern when it comes to the country like Russia that I can name while being not associated with the UN myself. And then we've seen that throughout the way in the region. And now we see not only a conflict, but it's a war that can already be branded really as something that either can be a precursor or a part of how the world war could look like. And part of what we don't highlight in this case as well, which has a global implication, is that unlike to any other wars, when it comes to Russia, we have a nuclear power waging the war and actually pursuing its strategic goal of almost annihilation of another country and nation, and being already open about it. And if that becomes a case when it is left without a recourse, and then compromise or pursuit for peace becomes a goal in and itself, at the expense of a victimized country, then we can say that the World War III already has a pattern. And I will not name countries there as well, how that could develop.
Thank you very much, Eka. President Calmire asks for the floor first.
So I don't know if it's work. It did. I heard a lot of words about war, about peace, about Security Council, about global reforms. We are here in Geneva, and I would like to spend some words to international Geneva. Geneva is concentrating a lot of technical organizations. Geneva is home of the European seat of the United Nations. In Geneva, you have the coordination of all the postal services. In Geneva, you decide the frequencies for cell phones. You decide about working conditions, about environment, also about the causes of conflicts, environmental problems, mine clearances. In Geneva, you have, if I may say, a controlled globalization, if I may say, on a technical level. But they are global organizations. And in Geneva, they have some problems. That means you have seen the WTO. The WTO is is really suffering, but not only. You have problems by the WHO, the health organization, and you have other organizations, for example, the ICRC, the NGO ICRC, who is losing 4,000 jobs, cutting 4,000 jobs. Also by the World Organization for Refugees, they are also cutting jobs. And I mean, we cannot do as we have, if we had only to manage current affairs. Geneva is suffering, and like every multilateral organization, it is a hub of multilateralism, and it's suffering a lot. So it concentrates a number of, first remark, it concentrates a number of data and informations, but this diversity is also its weakness. And because you have no common standards, you have no control of a collection of data. Member states are doing that. And we have to reform that in order to have really effective or technical organization that can play their role, as we have seen with the WHO during the pandemic. We have to create common standards for all this information and data that are here in Geneva. Geneva is a multilateral seat par excellence, but once again, we have to, it is perceived as if we don't need anymore this multilateral technical organization. And I think it's not true. We need multilateral technical organization for the globalization of the world. We live in a world of global risk where no state, even the strongest one, can manage with pandemic, with environmental risk, with all the risk we know, with war, with peace. No strong state, even the strongest one, the US, cannot manage alone with migration, for example. We can see that. So we need this technical organization. And I would suggest we perhaps begin to talk about global reforms by reforming the technical organization. It is perhaps easier than beginning with global, like the Security Council, with political organization. It is perhaps easier, but it will bring some efficiency in the globalization of our world that we need. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's another concrete proposal, and thank you for standing up for Geneva. I have Dr. Sarah Geldin and then President Zappel.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I have just general observations. We talk about wars, which is basically the deterioration of a conflict to the point where it becomes physical destruction and so on. We, at the level of nations, have resolved that by the idea of arbitration and based against a system of laws and a judiciary structure or otherwise. I do believe that WTO, for example, has been a very successful organization. For those of you who may remember, this is where Boeing and Airbus used to take their usual disputes, and they have the dispute settlement mechanism that is part and parcel of that. Problem is, and again, I share the Chairman David's view on this, suing for peace when it's a matter of measuring strength of the aggressor versus the victim, I think is not a viable proposal. But we have to strengthen in many ways arbitration mechanisms, not just those that rely exclusively on diplomacy between the different parts. If we can have like the International Court of Justice and so on, we have mechanisms that can play that role. Amr Moussa will remember well, some of you may not know that, but at the end of the settlement for peace between Israel and Egypt, there was the issue of Taba. Well, it was taken to international judicial arbitration, not to resume war again, but as a way of avoiding this becoming a conflict again. So I think where I haven't heard much in the discussion, the idea of strengthening the International Court of Justice, creating dispute mechanisms equivalent to what happens in the WTO on trade and other things of that nature. And yes, it does create more boundaries, but it would fit under the beautiful statement which is told to young legislators, go forth and fashion the wise constraints that make people free. Thank you.
Thank you. I have President Zadlers, please.
Mr. Chairman, I really was inspired by Chancellor Feynman, who said, you know, if we want to have a plan, we need methodology. And we are talking a lot about reforming Security Council, but there are very few proposals how to do that. What are the proposals? I'll just play devil's advocate and I'll say my proposals, and you may discuss on them. The first thing is we should increase the permanent number of permanent members according to geographic and geopolitical regions. Who is chosen? It must be done by the regions themselves. Who is respected from that region to have, you know, more trusts than just nominated. The second point is non-permanent members must remain as a balance to majority. No veto anymore. Majority vote, but we need a mechanism code to transfer the majority vote into consensus. And of course, one country, one vote. But then again, we'll quote Chancellor Feynman, we need compromises. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Funny you should mention proposals. At the last meeting in Baku, I was on a panel and I was provocative and I was an enfant terrible in that panel. And I did drop a proposal which was greeted with guffaws from some quarters, and rightly so. But my proposal was, and it still is, that we make the G20 plus African Union the permanent members, no veto, plus 14 members rotating basis. Because the G20 contains pretty much everybody who is either in the Security Council permanent members or wants to be there. Plus it has the European Union and it has now the African Union. That makes 21 plus 14 for a total of 35. The number is manageable. There is no veto. And on the no veto power is where the guffaws started and said, oh, it's not realistic. Somebody cried out. Yes, it's not realistic, but the human race has achieved things that were totally unrealistic. So it's a matter of putting our minds to it. I don't want to take up, we have very little time remaining. Mr. Moussa, yeah, it's up to you now. Sorry.
But thank you. Thank you very much. I have only 4 or 5 very brief points. First one is on the use or the threat of using nuclear power, nuclear forces, nuclear bombs. In addition to what Eka has mentioned, I would mention that a member of the current Israeli government has talked about throwing nuclear bomb over the people in Gaza. So now it has become easy for anybody anywhere to threaten with the use of the nuclear weapons. This should be borne in mind by all of us. This is something very serious, very dangerous. It's become easy to threat, especially from people sitting in the seat of government, the seat of power. The other one is about genocide. Genocide, now, as we meet here, the International Court of Justice has started the consideration of the complaint by South Africa and Bolivia against Israel for the crimes, for the crime of genocide, in addition to the collective punishment and other major violations of the international law and the Geneva Conventions. On the two other points, the one that you mentioned about the group of 20, to have them in addition, of course, with the African Union, but no Latin American organization, no other Asian organization. At the same time, with the lack of the enforcement action ability, it would be just a club to talk. They cannot order a ceasefire. They cannot order the composition of a peacekeeping force. They cannot order any other form of international enforcement action. This is the weak point in talking about an enlarged G20. They cannot perform the authority of the Security Council. Finally, you mentioned, Mr. Moderator, my dear David, about the atrocities. You used the word atrocities. And I hope that...
I know you'd hit me.
I hope you can, when you consider the situation in Gaza and the way people were slaughtered, with 23 casualties, dead, killed people, with 6,000 baby and child, this is atrocity.
Which was built in.
Yes, it is built in, you are right. Yes, it's built in. It could be used anytime by the same power. We have to be honest. It was expected. What was going on in the occupied West Bank was unacceptable. So why should we consider a reaction by the Palestinians as atrocities? Of course, we shouldn't, as individual, yourself, myself, etc. Definitely we're against anything that address the civilians or harm them. But when there is military occupation, there will be always resistance. This is the rule of the game. You cannot approach the Palestinians. Why do you hit them? Because they are being hit yesterday. So we talk about today. That brings us to the compromise. The compromise is there. There was the Camp David Accords, then the Oslo Agreement. The compromise is built in those agreements. So it cannot start today. And you need more compromise, not that you need, but this would give some people the idea that let us start again and ask the Palestinians to compromise again. They have already done the compromise. There was no compromise, no approach for peace, no initiative for peace by the Israeli side. Therefore, then we must start there.
It's very difficult for me to be ruthless with somebody of your stature and of your emotions in this issue. But
and my logic too.
And your logic.
Emotions.
But we have another couple of speakers. Okay. Thank you so much. Mr. Yeremich.
I see that a lot of people picked up on the enfant terrible thing. So this gives me an additional motive to go a mile further. And hopefully we're all going to meet in New York in September and in Baku in the coming months. I was suing for peace.
Max.
Yeah, sure. I'll be very quick. I think that the more I'm talking about the war in Ukraine, the longer it lasts, the worse the compromise is going to be. If you look from the perception of somebody who is sympathetic for the Ukraine cause, and I certainly am. I also come from a country that was attacked and part of its territory tried to be chopped off illegally. So I'm very sympathetic to the cause of Ukraine. And when I sue for peace, when I appeal for peace to be reached, I very much have the interest of Ukraine in my heart. I fear that the longer this goes on, the higher the price is going to be. And that the partition of Ukraine, which is going to happen at some point, it's going to be in a worse proportion if it happens, say, in this time of next year with the new government in Washington than what it could have been now. But these are my 10 cents. I really hope that first and foremost, the slaughter is going to come to an end there in that war number 1 that I mentioned. And of course, in this much, I'd say, more fierce war in which atrocities are abound in Gaza. However, there I fear that the international governance is going to be challenged. Ismail was mentioning ICJ. I have not very high expectations of the ICJ and the South African initiative there. That is going to set us further back, I fear, when it comes to those appeals. Okay, let's make international arbitration a choice instead of, going for a conflict. I wish I'm wrong on this, but time will tell. Thank you.
Thank you very much for making the point about suing for peace. Let me just give you no. We have 2 more speakers. An illustration. This morning, the Moldovan ambassador in Moscow was called into the foreign ministry and was read the Riot Act, which basically sounded a little bit like an ultimatum. So I think we need to keep those things in perspective as well. President Vicky Freiberger, please. And you are, and you too, Eka?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to intervene in response to Chancellor Feynman's proposal of compromise as a general overarching principle in solving the problems of the world. And I would like to add a nuance here, that not all compromise is justified, either morally or practically. I would make a sharp distinction between questions and matters that are debatable and on which compromise is not just possible but desirable, and existential questions which are beyond dispute, which are not open to debate, and which cannot admit to any kind of compromise. Madame Calmire has pointed out about Geneva as a center of organizations that, quite apart from geopolitical commitments and ideological stances and imperialistic desires or power desires or lack of them, we have technical organizations here. Where we had a meeting in Nizami Ganjavi had a meeting with the World Trade Organization leadership, and they pointed out how it is possible to work, if you like, with technical things. And I think Micheline was pointing out these organizations that propose technical solutions that are to the benefit of various nations in the world, and where compromise is sometimes difficult, painful, lengthy to achieve, but extremely profitable to all sides, and a win-win situation can be obtained. Whereas for existential questions, when one nation says to another, what is mine, but what is yours is also mine. That peace treaty that we signed with you is not worth the paper it is written on. You actually do not exist in our eyes. And if you persist in wishing to say that you exist and we were going to eliminate you from the face of the earth, you do not have a history except the one that we are inventing for you. You do not have a language. You are not really a people or a nation or human beings. That is not open to debate. It should not be open to debate, and there's no compromise that is possible on it. And unless the world understands the difference between the two, we are in for a very dire future.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Prime Minister Bondevik.
Yeah. First, is it working now? Yeah. First, back to the last dispute about compromises. I do agree with President Freiberger, because I in principle, very much in favor of compromises. And I've done so many compromises in domestic politics. But with regard to Ukraine, I find it more or less meaningless to start compromising on territory of Ukraine. That's meaningless. It's the same as Norway should negotiate with Hitler during the Second World War to give a part of Norway to Hitler. Of course, we would never do it. And I will fully understand Ukraine if they will never talk about compromises on territory. Maybe there are some other solutions, but not on territory. With regard to the Middle East, my friend Amr Musa, compromises. Yeah, you are right. There are already some compromises. You mentioned Camp David, but we have had two Camp Davids. We had the Camp David with President Carter and Sadat and Prime Minister Begin. And so we had the Camp David #2 with President Clinton, Arafat, and Barack. And I talked to Clinton after that, few weeks after his last efforts, and they were so close. They were so close. And Amr Musa knows that very well. We cannot go into detail, but Clinton summed it up. He said, you will never have a solution on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict without a solution on Jerusalem. That is the core issue. And you will never have a solution on Jerusalem without a solution on the holy sites of Jerusalem. That's the core. And so you have refugees, you have borders and so on, but Jerusalem is the main obstacle. The Oslo Accord was not a peace agreement, but it was more a way of going further for more negotiations. But of course, it was important that that PLO recognized Israel and Israel recognized PLO. And you got the Palestinian authorities ruling the West Bank. That was important by the Oslo Accord, but not more. It was not a peace agreement. It has never been implemented. So back to the important question, if you talk about reform of Security Council, who should be members? Who should be permanent members? Because we need both permanent and non-permanent members. Well, I indicated in my intervention, it's obvious that US, China, Russia must be there. I will also say the African Union, the European Union, the Arab League. And so we need a representative from Latin America. They don't, unfortunately, they don't have a strong regional organization in Latin America. So maybe you have to end up with an individual country, Brazil, or, for instance.
Brazil is part of the G20.
I know. And so to your proposal about the G20, that can be another solution, but that will mean a much bigger Security Council, and I'm afraid of that. But if that is a possible solution, okay, let us go for it. But then Europe will be overrepresented. Latin America will be too less represented. So there are weaknesses with the G20, bringing it over to the Security Council. But if it's a solution, okay, let us go for it. Because at least it is more fair than the current composition of the Security Council. And this, we all agree that the current composition is unfair and just.
What about the veto?
I'm in favor of not having veto anymore.
Thank you very much. Before we go to Ege for final statement, just to, as right of reply, I absolutely agree with you. No teeth means no action. But the current Security Council has teeth. There's still no action. Okay. I'm not a Middle East expert by any stretch of the imagination, but when we talk about Jerusalem, I know, when we talk about Jerusalem, in my mind, the four-way agreement on Berlin comes up in my mind of 1971. That was a nut that wasn't being able to be cracked. It was cracked. So there is always, and we should always look to history to learn some lessons. I'm not saying, you know, copy and paste, but Eka, please.
2 points. And I come back always maybe as a lawyer to the normative basis and then values and principles that need to be underpinning to what we aspire to. And then it seems to me, then I guess it is something that I've began with, we are at the phase when revisionist powers are revisioning the system. So it's not even in the midst of the process. So I hardly can see that anytime soon we can come to the global compromise that can reflect commonality of the views and determination and resolve to build that common global framework. And in this process, everything comes down to who has more resolve to defend what's most important when it comes to the values and principles and norms that one aspires to be an underpinning foundation for the global order and global governance that we could imagine for the future. And if those countries that imagine that rules-based order, which reflect fair, inclusive participation of small and big states in the system, have more resolve into defending it, then we might have a chance of coming out of this process without World War III and the biggest calamity that could be then maybe conducive to the creation of the global order of that kind. And one example of lack, perhaps, sufficient attention to an in-depth, value-based and norms-based related attention to the global governance-related issues, or the SDGs for that matter, is that we frequently talk about how to bankroll the changes so that the SDGs and as the goals are being achieved. But we rarely speak about what are some of the root causes of the problems that we face of non-achievement. And it's the bad governance in most of the countries as well. So we speak about how much money it will take for the goals to be achieved, but most of those money, if not a sufficient amount at least, will be wasted because of corruption and bad governance in the countries, which are the reasons why perhaps most of the SDGs are not met even now, and there needs to be the global action. So if we're not honest about adherence to what it takes actually to deliver and have resolve to do it, we'll spend more time in terms of talking about money still and then bankrolling some of the reforms, and we'll have no sustainable changes to that. That is my landing, actually, that we are talking about some of the aspirational changes in global order at a time when there's no momentum for that. So my message here is that we need to have alliances of those that have commonality of the goals and principles and adherence to the values, that we can strengthen ourselves in the way that we have more leverage for shaping up perhaps than future global order, rather than those who want to revise those rules. And as a representative of a small country, I do value the rules-based order where small countries have the same rights as the big ones, at least nominally in the legal terms, which is questioned right now by not only Russia, but primarily by Russia, obviously, as well.
Let's not forget, there's no such thing as a small member state. If we could only ensure the implementation of that. I think we've gone way over our time. I'm sorry for that, but I think it's been a very interesting and robust discussion. Despite this discussion, we still have so many, it was such a rich exchange. Let me just finish. I'm not going to even attempt any wash up. Let me just make 3 points that I think need to be borne in mind. One is that, I'm sorry, but I think today we have an absence of true leadership. And by true leadership, I mean leaders, whether heads of state, government, etc., who think about the common good, who look around to see how to make this world better. That is statesmanship, as opposed to politicians who wake up in the morning and check what are the latest polls. Number one. Number two, I think an unspoken elephant in the room is, not only just this room, is pervasive corruption, financial and political, which on the one side leads to poverty, but on the other it is also the biggest enemy of the rule of law, because by definition, corruption happens there where there is no rule of law and where they learn how to avoid laws. So if they avoid financial laws, they will avoid the paper that is not worth the price it's signed on, etc. And the third element, I think we need to increasingly be aware of factoring in AI. Artificial intelligence, as opposed to another acronym, HI, human intelligence, which created and will create AI, but also look at both of these acronyms against, compare with the third acronym, which is HN, which is human nature, which doesn't change. There's plenty of things more to be said, but thank you so much for this terrific discussion. And sorry to keep, but we're eating into your time to change clothes for dinner. That's all we're doing.